Hey guys, Frosty Knives here, back with another book review, and today we're going to be talking about the brand new book written by Stephen King with his son Owen King. We're going to be talking about Sleeping Beauties. This is a brand new book, just came out last month. Look at the glare on that cover. And I will say, right off the top of the bat, that even at the length that it is, this book still took me far too long to read when I did. So this book was just published by Stephen King and his son Owen. It clocks in at 702 pages. And this is the first time I've read it. I'm not going to hold this book up continually during the review. Wait, thumbnail. Because it's really heavy as a hardcover. But this is the first time that I have read anything by Owen King. Of course, it's hard to tell what is Owen and what is Stephen in the book, because I'm not sure how it was written. But this is my first experience reading something that was from the mind of Owen King. And I would like to say that it was an enjoyable experience. But I can't. So, the story is set in Dooling County, somewhere in the South. And it mostly takes place in a small town in Dooling County and Dooling County Women's Correctional Prison. There is a sleeping sickness that washes over the country, and it only affects women. So all women fall asleep. Not all women. There's a few that manage to stay awake through a variety of means, caffeine, drugs, and all kinds of stuff. But for the most part, 99% of women fall asleep. And they become enshrouded in cocoons. And when the men, or when anybody tries to wake them up out of the cocoons, the women become violent and almost feral. And they go, and homicidal, and then they kill, and then they go back to sleeping again. And so now we have the men that are left, and it's how do we deal with what's going on, and this, that, and the other thing. And when I first heard about this premise, I thought to myself, wow, I wonder how they're going to pull it off. And it turns out they're going to pull it off quite unsuccessfully, in my opinion. So the book is really split into two parts. Okay, there's the first half where the sickness and the sleeping sickness and women are succumbing. The first half where the disease is sort of rolling over the world, and then there's the second half where the disease is, all the women are asleep now, and the men have to deal with it. It does take place. Even though it is a worldwide epidemic, it does take place primarily in Dooling County. We see mostly what happens in this small town of Dooling County, and mostly what happens in this women's correctional prison, in the prison. So even though it's a worldwide epidemic, we're only seeing it from the Dooling County perspective. And I can tell you that everything that was written in this book. All right, let me back this up. I'm going to use a word to describe this book that I have never used to describe any Stephen King book in a review that I have ever done. This book is derivative. This book is under the dome without the dome. This book is The Stand without all the cool shit that made The Stand cool, without Randall Flagg and Mother Abigail. This book is The Green Mile without John Coffey. I mean, this book, there is absolutely nothing new in this book. This book has been written before by Stephen King before, and has been written much better before than this. So, let's talk about what I liked and what I didn't like. I mean, it sounds like I'm going to shit all over this book. The book has a large cast of characters. That's very typical for a Stephen King book. A lot of people, a lot of moving parts, a lot of things going on. Sometimes a little hard to follow, but for the most part, it does have a rather large cast, and that's okay. The premise you know, it may have been great in thought, but in execution, there's a lot that was left. There's a lot of holes. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that you're left. And I said in one of my previous reviews that I don't always need answers for why things are the way they are, but sometimes you do. And in this book, that you do. You don't. You get an idea of where the sickness comes from. You don't really get an explanation of it. The book takes place over the course of a week. And even though it's a worldwide epidemic, we don't get to see really what's going on in the world very much. It's not like The Stand, where as Captain Trips is ripping the world apart, you really get to see it as it's racing across the country and everything. You don't really get to see that in this book, little blurbs and snippets here and there, but for the most part, it really focuses on Dueling County, and I think maybe they could have stripped away the worldwide part of it and just focused on Dueling County, but then again, we would have had Under the Dome without the dome, which is essentially what we have in this book. And I will say there's a lot of fat in this book. I don't usually think there's a lot of fat in a Stephen King novel, but there's a lot of fat in this book. There's a lot of things that happen in this book that I said, why is it in this book? There are things that probably do need to be trimmed. And there is a mysterious woman that shows up in the book, and she shows up in Dueling County, and she's sort of the key to everything. And it's never really explained what she is, who she is, where she came from, where is she going. She's pretty much there as a plot device to move the plot along. And does the sleeping sickness come from her because she can cure it and she's immune to it and she's supernatural and she's this and she's that? I don't want to give too much of it away. But she shows up and she's through the whole book and she is a major component of the book, but she's really just a plot device and not a very well constructed plot device to just keep the plot moving along. I will say the first half of the book was better than the second half of the book. The first half of the book is when the sickness is rolling through and people are succumbing and people are fighting, trying to stay awake, and shit's going down. And that first half of the book, where the disease is rolling over everybody, was fairly interesting because you get to see what's happening as people are falling asleep and they're fighting to stay awake. The second half of the book grinds almost to a halt. And you start to read the second half of the book and you go, I don't know what the point is. And so that's where the second half where nothing really happens and it's really a grind. And that's the last, 350 pages of the book, if not a little bit more, and everything just sort of grinds to a halt. And it was very hard to get through. The book, unlike most other Stephen King books, and again, I don't know how much of this is Stephen King. I don't know how much of this is Owen. The voice and the writing is very cohesive, so it's not very jarring. So it sounds like it was written by in one voice. So I don't know how the writing process went. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how much of this is Stephen King and how much of this is Owen. So again, the criticisms, I don't know who to levy to or to both. I don't know. But I will say for a Stephen King book, this book is extremely heavy-handed. And it's heavy-handed in the symbolism, and it's heavy-handed in the message. And that's not usual for a Stephen King. It's very, very heavy-handed in the symbolism. And I'll give you an example, just an example of that. This book literally has a magic tree, a garden, a snake, and a woman named Evie. And 3/4 of the way through the book, I was wondering, was I reading a book by Stephen King or was I reading a book by Billy Graham or by Pat Robertson? Because the symbolism was just in your face, heavy-handed. And King has dealt with symbolism in the past. Look at The Stand with Mother Abigail and Randall Flagg, the archetypes of good and evil and God and the devil and the whole religious overtones. He's dealt with that before. Well, not heavy-handed, didn't hit you in the face with a sledgehammer, but in this one, it was really, really heavy-handed. And the character of Eve was never really explained she was, where she came from, why she was really doing what was going on was really going on, other than the other criticism that I have, which was the messages in this were very heavy-handed. It almost felt like this was written by a couple of man-haters. It's a lot of gender politics, a lot of sexism and toxic masculinity, and a lot of what's going on in the world as far as politics and things that are going on in the world made its way into this book. And again, King has dealt with those kind of issues in the past, but he never dealt with them so, in my opinion, so heavy-handed. And I started to think maybe I felt this way because I am a male, and so that I'm coming from a male perspective. So maybe that's the reason I reacted to this book the way that I reacted. I don't know. I would love to get a female perspective on this book to see what a female perspective would be on the book. And maybe it's just me reacting the way I reacted because it really did feel at a lot of times that it was an attack on masculinity, and I'm not saying that's not warranted. There are some very good topics in here that are extremely warranted. And do I think that if this were to really happen in the real world, do I think that men would act the way they did in this book? I kind of do. I think that in reality that a lot of people and a lot of the male survivors would probably do a lot of the things that the people in this book did. But for the most part, I couldn't get into it. I couldn't enjoy it. I wanted to enjoy it, and I couldn't. And I needed to finish it to do the review and to finish the book, and it just slogged. And I had to force myself to read it. The writing is fine. The characters are fine. The descriptions are fine. I mean, the actual writing itself was good, was what you expect from a King novel. Good descriptions, good characterizations, good a snapshot into everyday life. But I just was left I was just left with the question, what's the point? What was the point of the book? Because the resolution of the book, it didn't seem to resolve anything. It just seemed to, this was an event, and it took place over a week, and it happened, and there was a resolution, and then everybody kind of went back to what they were doing before the event happened. And I just couldn't think of what was the point. Things or society or people were supposed to change after an event in a book. That's the point of what goes on in books, is that there's characters, and then there's an event, and then there's a resolution, and then there's a change. And I didn't really feel like there was a change, really. I felt like, okay, the event is over, and now we're just going to go back to doing what we were doing before. So at the end, Sleeping Beauties, in my opinion, was a slog of a read. At times, it was boring as hell. There were some things that didn't need to be included in it. I don't know if it was just a bad idea of a novel or just bad in execution. The writing itself was fine. The characters were fine. You know, the descriptions were fine. The standoff at the prison at the end was, you know, a well-written standoff at the prison at the end. But again, there was what I thought were some things that didn't need to be in it. Things weren't fully explained. In this book, I did need to know where this character of Eve Black came from. What was her point? Where was she? Where did she come from? What was the point of the whole thing? You know, if the point of the whole book was to say that when women are removed from the equation, men are just going to become warlike creatures without any type of empathy. I mean, that seems to be what the point of the book was. If you remove women from the equation, if you take women out of society, then men will basically become warlike until they kill themselves off. And if that was the point, then the resolution, there was no real resolution, because I didn't feel that the men in the book changed. I didn't feel like that there was going to be a dramatic shift in the way that men dealt with themselves and the world after the events of this book took place. So if the point was to prove that men were a certain way without women, there was no real resolution. It was just everything kind of went back to sort of the way it was. So I didn't know what to expect going into this because I thought it was an interesting premise, but I didn't expect it to be a sloggy, sort of boring read that I had a hard time getting through. So in the end, I can't recommend reading this if you're curious to see, you know, how it is. But in the end, I really can't recommend reading this. There's just and it's getting a lot of, I guess, good reviews and good praises. But you know, if you are a completionist and you want to read Stephen King completionist and you want to get into the world of Owen King, then certainly go out and take a gander at it. I cannot recommend reading the book. You could certainly skip it. And I got to give it a rating out of 5, don't I? Boy, I got to give it a rating out of 5. I'm going to give it a 2. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. Because I just think there were so many issues with the book that the good characters and the good writing aside, I just think that it just needed some work. It's already been, they've already bought the rights to make this into a movie. So at some point down the road, we're going to be getting this as a movie. But I give this a 2 out of 5. Guys, I think you can skip it. I really do. I think you can skip it unless you're a completionist and you just have to read everything. So there's my review of Sleeping Beauty by Stephen King and Owen King. Read it if you must. Read it if you really want to. But I think you can skip it. Maybe pick it up when it becomes on the cheap, when it becomes in the paperbacks or whatever. So what's coming next down the pike? I know we sort of gotten off the track of the Castle Rock tour because all of this new Stephen King stuff started coming out. So what's next on the pike, coming down the pike, is the next book I am going to read, and it's going to be a quick read, so the review should come up fairly soon. I'm going to read Gwendy's Button Box. That's another new Stephen King book that I just got my hands on, and that's only about 170 pages. It's a novella, so I'm going to read that, and that shouldn't take too long, and then I will do a review on that. And then yesterday, Friday, 1922 just came out on Netflix, the new Stephen King straight-to-Netflix movie. So I'm going to watch that, and I'll probably do a review on that. And then after all is said and done, we will probably get back to the Castle Rock tour. We left off with Cujo, and we're going to pick up next with The Body, which is the novella that the movie Stand By Me was based off of. So that's what's coming down the pike. The next 3 things I sort of had my mind on. So guys, there's my review of Sleeping Beauty. I wish it could be better. I wish I would have liked this book better, but I just didn't. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you've read the book, what your comments are, because I would love to see other people's opinions on the book. So if you've read it, put some comments down below. Did you like it? Did you not like it? If you did like it, tell me why you liked it. If you didn't like it, tell me why you like it. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your enemies, and I'll have to see you again in the next video.